So, of course, I'm kidding. Chapter 9 of First Kings. I could talk about that for the entire class for sure because it's on my mind and I'm just it's at it's always the day before. It's just constantly on my mind, and I'm thinking, what have I forgotten? What have I not got ready? But let's turn our thoughts to First Kings and look at chapter 9. By the way, I had a note here. I think it was Jimmy. Jimmy, I believe you're the one that told me this. I got to start writing down the source of these so I can give proper credit or blame where due. But we were talking about chapter 8 and kind of the dedication of the temple. The ark was brought into the temple. Solomon gives this prayer. Well, first of all, it was kind of a dedication type, almost like a small sermon that Solomon gives in verses 12 through 21 of chapter 8. Verses 22 through 53, you have kind of a prayer of dedication by Solomon, a benediction, 54 through 61, and then Solomon sacrifices. But Jimmy and I were talking about this, and there are all these ornate trappings of the temple. Solomon really went all out, and of course, Solomon had the money, but he was going to spare no expense for the temple of the Lord. He wanted to make sure that everything was just as nice as could be, because this is God's house. And Solomon understood God is not a physical entity as we are. He didn't live in the house in the sense of, this is where he comes home to and sleeps. And so, he understood that. It represented God's presence among his people, but he's taken the position, this is God's house, and I'm going to make sure it is as nice as we can possibly make it. But what Jimmy and I were talking about, he asked the question, and it really is, this is where you get into application today. Do you and I go to the same trouble to prepare ourselves to be God's temple today? The New Testament uses that expression that we as the church, if we're Christians, of course Christians make up the church. It's not a building, just like God's house wasn't a physical structure. It represented his presence. People are the church. Do we prepare ourselves to be God's holy temple? Do we go to that same kind of trouble to prepare our lives and to make sure that we live in a way that's pleasing and acceptable in God's sight? I thought that was a pretty good thought there as you think about all the trouble that Solomon goes to prepare God's house. So anyway, going into chapter 9, thank you, Jimmy, for that, because like I said, I thought that was a really, really thought-provoking comment. Chapter 9. Solomon he's finished the house here, and God appears to him again. He tells him he's heard his prayer, his supplication. He's hallowed this house. In other words, we would use the word sanctified, set it apart. It's not just any old structure now. It has a special purpose. He says, I put my name there forever. Mine eyes, mine heart shall be there perpetually. And then, of course, there is a conditional promise. My name is going to be there forever if. And so he says, if you walk before me as David your father walked, integrity of heart, uprightness, to do according to all that I've commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever. So he says, I'm going to take care of you, Solomon. I can take care of you. I can take care of your posterity. Of course, God certainly has that capability, but he says it's conditional. And then he gives the other side. We might say the flip side of the coin, verse 6. If you shall at all turn from following me, you or your children, you won't keep my commandments and my statutes, but you go and serve other gods, and this is kind of prophetic, isn't it? Because that's exactly what Solomon's going to do, and worship them. I will cut Israel off out of the land which I have given them. And this house, which I've hallowed for my name, will I cast out of my sight, and Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. Again, prophetic, because this is what's going to end up happening. Solomon's going to turn away from God. He's going to serve idols, and God is going to cut Israel off The northern kingdom around 721 BC, southern kingdom around 587. They're going to be cast out into captivity. The house that God had hallowed for his name was, of course, going to be destroyed around 586, 587 BC by Nebuchadnezzar. And Israel becomes just, as he says here in the King James, a proverb and a byword among all the people. They'll eventually come back from captivity, but never reach any kind of semblance of the greatness they previously had. And it's, he even says this house, verse 8, which is high. It's exalted, in other words, prominent. Everybody that passes by, they're going to be astonished. They'll hiss. And, we might use the expression kind of, shake their head and just, when it says hiss, that's kind of the idea. Man, we just sort of shake our head and just wonder. They'll say, why has the Lord done thus unto this land, to this house? And they'll answer, because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought forth their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have taken hold upon other gods, and have worshipped them, and served them. Therefore hath the Lord brought upon them all this evil. So, Solomon, you've been warned. A conditional promise that, unfortunately, Solomon is not going to hold up his end of the bargain, as we say. Hiram has furnished Solomon, of course, with cedar trees and fir trees and gold. So Hiram and Solomon, they have, sort of an agreement and a friendship, and they help each other out quite a bit. So Solomon gives Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. Hiram comes out to see the cities. He doesn't like them, though. What cities are these? It says they pleased him not in the end of verse 12. Verse 13, he says, what cities are these which thou hast given me, my brother? And he called them the land of Kabul, or Kabul, unto this day. Does anybody have a note there what Kabul means, or Kabul? Good for nothing's what you've got. What'd you say, Miss Becky? Unproductive, displeasing, dirty. I've seen all these meanings given to the name, but suffice it to say, he's saying he named them because he named them a name that indicated he didn't like them. We're not really told why. In fact, I was talking to somebody about this recently. Mary Sue, were we talking about that? Okay. The only speculation I've ever seen that a lot of people just say, well, we just don't know why, and we don't, but I think it might be a good speculation. I'd never considered it. I think I ran across it in maybe some preaching school notes from someone else. But possibly the Tyrians, they typically dwelt on the coast. These would be inland cities. So maybe he didn't like them because he's used to living on coastline. Maybe he wanted beach cities. I don't know. But we're just not told exactly why he didn't like them. But he didn't, so he named them displeasing or dirty or good for nothing, whatever. And it may be that, him and Solomon were friends, and no indication that Solomon would try to cheat him. Whatever the reason, he didn't like them. Then you've got more detail here on we might say, the tax that Solomon levies out of Israel. 20 years' worth are described here. Of course, Solomon now has built 2 houses. He's built his house, the Lord's house. I think that's about it for chapter 9. I was just looking to see. There's several verses. We won't read them all for time, but basically verses 15 through 28 is just kind of the miscellaneous fortification of the kingdom and some other acts of Solomon. But let's go into chapter 10, because I got to get us to a decent stopping point. I'm going to keep an eye on the clock. I want to get to the end of Solomon's reign, if not to the division of the kingdom today. Chapter 10 is the account of the Queen of Sheba. Again, probably familiar to many of us, if not all of us. She comes to visit Solomon. She's heard of his wisdom. Sheba, by the way, was somewhat southwest of Arabia. So she comes, and by the way, there's a parallel in 2 Chronicles 9, 1 through 12. She'd heard of Solomon's greatness. She came to prove him with hard questions, which most scholars are agreed this means riddles. Arabs love riddles, and so she probably came to give him a series of riddles and see, can you figure this out? And people that can figure out riddles, It's a big deal to them. That shows how wise you are. And of course, Solomon answered all her questions. He figured out all the riddles. Jesus, by the way, references the Queen of Sheba. He calls her the Queen of the South, Matthew 12:42, Luke 11:31. And what does he say about her? Yeah, she basically what he says, to put it in how we would say it is, as Jimmy said, she'll fare better in judgment than some of those Jews in Jesus' time, because we would say she kind of crossed land and sea. She went to any length to go to Solomon to hear his wisdom. And Jesus says what? Behold, a greater than Solomon is here. They didn't want to listen to Jesus. He said, she'll cross land and sea to hear Solomon, who was just a mere human. You won't hardly go across the street to listen to the Son of God, God in the flesh. And she'll rise up in judgment with this generation. So she, of course, is overwhelmed with his wisdom, and she praises Jehovah because of Solomon and his wisdom. Some people say she converted to Judaism because of this. In fact, I ran across something that Adam Clark in his commentary actually relates it. That was, it certainly involves some, it was interesting, we'll put it that way. But as far as biblical evidence, there's some Jewish tradition, but there's no biblical evidence. All you can do is go with what you're told. But did she convert to Judaism? I don't know, possibly, but we're not told about it. Yeah, if she did. Jesus certainly doesn't tell us. We know when he references her that she converted. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. So she says in verse 6, it was a true report I heard in mine own land of thine acts and thy wisdom, but I didn't believe it till I came. Mine eyes had seen it. And of course, the expression we even use to this day, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. And so she says, your servants, your men, the king's court, they must really be happy, and what a great God you serve, who delighted to put you on the throne. Of course, she gives gifts to Solomon. Solomon gives gifts to her. There's a navy of Hiram. Of course, we'll read about Solomon's navy a little bit later. Maybe that Hiram's navy is how she found out they would travel. We see that with Solomon's navy later on. They would travel around. They would bring things back every so often, precious, things like ivory, gold, silver, also exotic livestock, peacocks, apes, and things like that. And so maybe in their travels that Sheba heard tell of this king over Israel named Solomon. So they exchanged gifts. I know I'm condensing a lot here in chapter 10, but there's something else I thought I wanted to. Oh, they exchanged gifts, kind of like, it wasn't that, she had, well, she no doubt would have been wealthy. She was a queen. But it's kind of like, I think of it as when you go, when I go see someone like in another country, you take them a gift a lot of times. And a lot of times you try to take them something that, if I'm going to see somebody in Costa Rica, I'm going to take them a distinctly American gift, if I can find something like that. And a lot of times they may give you a gift, whether they come see you or you go down there. And it may be a distinctly Costa Rican or whatever the country may be gift. And so, that's probably, Sheba brings things for Solomon and something that's unique to her country. And then Solomon gives her a gift that's unique to his country. We might use the term souvenirs. So that's kind of what happens here. And then verses 14 through 29 of chapter 10 just kind of detail the greatness of Solomon, just the wealth and the splendor of his kingdom. It really is amazing. There was something, I was looking for the verse. Well, I lost it. Oh, 27 of chapter 10. The king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones. Cedars made he to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. So in other words, they're so wealthy. Of course, the drinking vessels are of gold. They're not even drinking from silver. They're drinking from pure gold. It just shows wealth to excess, really. So Solomon's, his wealth, his splendor of his kingdom. There's parallel here, 2 Chronicles 9:13 through 17. The targets that are mentioned in verse 16, what are those? Anybody got a different term there? Yeah, shields. These will be round shields. And they're made of gold, 600 shekels of gold to one target, and there's 200 of them. I have a note right here in my Bible. It depends on who you look at, and there's no way to say exactly what this comes out to today because you have inflation and all that, but something like $38,400 each. That's astounding how much you're spending on 200 gold shields that are for decoration. And then you take it a step further and you make 300 more that are of beaten gold, and 3 pounds of gold to one shield. They go in the house of the forest of Lebanon. By the way, it's of interest. I'm getting a little bit ahead in our study, but these gold shields, they last just a few years. Why? You could say that. Rehoboam, in his foolishness, of course, he causes the kingdom to divide, and of course God had a hand in that as well because of Solomon's idolatry, as we'll talk about in a moment. But I just went blank on the guy's name that comes up against him. Is it Egypt? Let me look. It's in 1 Kings 14. It's not that far ahead. Egypt. Shishak, king of Egypt, comes up against Jerusalem, and he takes away all those shields. And you know what old Rehoboam does? He says, well, no big deal, we'll make some more. And he makes them out of bronze, which, is still not just the cheapest thing ever, but compared to gold, I've heard sermons on exchanging the gold shields for bronze. And sometimes people do that. They exchange the golden shield of pure, undefiled New Testament Christianity, the one church that Jesus purchased with his own blood, and they exchange it for a bronze shield that could never even hold a candle. You could have the most magnificent church building and the most involved people and whatever it may be, but if it's a man-made denomination, at the end of the day, it's just a bronze shield, and it's just taking the place, but it can never take the place of the real thing. So I like that. I like that analogy, but these shields are going to last for just a few years before Rehoboam is going to have them borrowed, as you put it, from the king of Egypt. He's going to come along and attack them and take those back home with him. Of course, Solomon builds himself had built a throne, a great throne of ivory. Now, can you imagine a throne made out of pure ivory? That's pretty magnificent in itself. But then he takes it a step further. How? He goes next level, right? What does he do? He overlays it with gold. I mean, it's a pure ivory throne. That alone is just no telling how expensive. But then he says, I'm going to take it up a notch. I'm going to cover it with gold. It's just, again, wealth to excess. And so he's got the stays on either side. 2 lions stood beside that, kind of guarding the throne. And then, you got the 6 steps and a lion on each side of the steps. It's just, like verse 20 says, there was not the like made in any kingdom. Wouldn't you like to be able to see that? One day, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask the Lord, I want to see that. I want to see what that looked like, because I can just, I can't even imagine. So again, verse 21, the drinking vessels were of gold. None were of silver. It was nothing accounted of in the days of Solomon. They didn't even think that much of it. They're just drinking from pure gold. It just shows how wealthy they were. Verse 22 talks about the navy at Tarshish. And of course, they got Hiram's navy as well. Again, Hiram and Solomon, they're buddies. Once in 3 years, the navy of Tarshish comes back, bring gold, silver, ivory, apes, peacocks, all kinds of things. So Solomon exceeded the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. People come from all over to hear about, or to hear and see for themselves his unrivaled wisdom. That's verse 24. All right, let's go into chapter 11. So Solomon is this is the downhill. You know, we've just seen chapters, what, I guess maybe like 7, 8, 9, 10. You're at the mountaintop with Solomon. And now there's just going to be the decline. This is his decline, his apostasy, and eventually his rejection by God. And of course, it all goes back to what? Women. The strange women, the foreign or unauthorized women. He loved many strange women. And again, just to not to beat a dead horse here, but just to remind us, the strange there, meaning unauthorized. There's a reference. In fact, if I could get somebody to volunteer. Exodus 34:16. All right, Brother Ricky. And then Deuteronomy 7:3 and 4. All right, Billy. It wasn't like Solomon just, I didn't know. Isn't it amazing how often with our children that they get into trouble for something I didn't know? Something that you've said until you're blue in the face, as my mom used to say all the time. Solomon knew as well. He had warnings. You got that Exodus verse, Brother Ricky? 19, what did I say? 34:16. He says, don't intermarry with these people. They're idolatrous. The reason they're being driven out of the land, the reason you're getting the promised land, Israel, is because it's a judgment from God against these idolatrous people. They're being cast out because of their idolatry. So you don't go intermarrying because they're going to turn your heart away. And then Deuteronomy 7:3 and 4. He says, don't do it. They'll turn your heart away. They're going to cause God's anger to burn against you, and you'll be destroyed. Well, Solomon loves many strange, unauthorized women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said, don't do that. But Solomon clave, he held to these women in love. 700 wives, princesses, 300 concubines. His wives turned away his heart. When he was old, some people estimate around 50 years old at this time. By the way, most people suspect Song of Solomon was written probably during his first marriage. He's young, he's in love, he's still faithful to the Lord. You see a lot of this happen in the latter part of his life, and it seems that Ecclesiastes is written near the end of his life when he's finally waking up and realizing what a mess he had made of his life by marrying all these unauthorized women that were so idolatrous. But his wives turned his heart away. He goes after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. He does evil in the sight of the Lord, went not fully after the Lord as did David. He built an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem. And then he does the unthinkable. He builds a high place for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. Molech was famous for what? The child sacrifice. Sacrificing their children. And it's just unbelievable that Solomon not only tolerated it, he built a high place because one of his wives loved Molech, and I'm going to keep her happy. How sad. Likewise, he did for all his strange wives which burned incense, sacrifice unto their gods. Of course, God, because of this, in verse 9, is angry. This is Solomon, the beginning of Solomon's rejection, because his heart was turned away from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice. And God had told him, God had warned him, God had commanded him, verse 10. And so he says in verse 11, for as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee and will give it to thy servant. This is going to happen, Solomon, but it's not going to happen in your days. But I am rending it out of your hand, or out of the hand of your son. I'm not going to take the whole kingdom. I'm going to give one tribe for David, my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen. So God says, I'm going to rend the kingdom from you. It's not going to happen in your days, and there will be one kingdom left for David. Now, why were those two stipulations given? For David's sake, right? Because God said David was faithful. And, of course, the Messiah is going to come from David's line, and so there's a messianic promise there as well. But he says, David was faithful for my servant David's sake. This is not going to happen in your days, and there will still be the one kingdom, the one tribe, rather, that will remain. Now, no more peace for Solomon's reign. Up to this point, it's just been peace, right? Everything's going great. Just money, making money hand over fist. The Navy's going abroad not to fight battles. They're just going to explore and to bring home a lot of cool stuff. And now Solomon's heart's turned away from God, and God says, no more peace for you. There are adversaries coming now. Well, here's number one, verse 14. Number one is who? Hadad is his name. Hadad the Edomite. Remember David and Joab? They had conquered the Edomites. Well, not now. Now he's going to rebel. He had fled previously into Egypt. He comes out, and now he's going to be, we would say, a thorn in the side for Solomon. Then I was looking for the verse 23. Number two, adversary. Reason. He had fled from his lord, the king of Zobah. He gathers men. He becomes a captain over a band. He was an adversary to Israel all the days of Solomon, beside the mischief that Hadad did. And he abhorred Israel and reigned over Syria. Now, adversary number three, verse 26. And this is going to be public enemy number one as far as Solomon is concerned. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Now, when you get to, first it mentions about Jeroboam that he lifted up his hand against the king. Solomon built Millo, repaired the breach of the city of David his father. He was a mighty man of valor. And Solomon saw the young man that he was industrious, and he made him ruler over all the charge of the house of Joseph. So, it doesn't really tell us here. Did Solomon realize that he's kind of working against me, and maybe, the old expression, keep your friends close and your enemies closer? Maybe he thinks I'm going to keep him close, keep an eye on him, I'm going to give him a promotion. Or maybe he's thinking if I can keep him busy enough, he'll stay out of my hair or stay out of trying to cause trouble for the king. I don't know. But that may have happened before he started causing problems for Solomon. He may have promoted him, and then this happened later on. But anyways, we're not told for sure. But when Jeroboam is going out of Jerusalem, verse 29, this prophet, Ahijah the Shilonite, finds him. He discovers him in the way, and he says he's got a message for him. He had clad himself. He was wearing a new garment. So it's just those two. And Ahijah grabs hold of the new garment, and he tears it into 12 pieces, of course representing 12 tribes. And he says to Jeroboam, here, you take 10. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, I'm going to rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon. I'm going to give 10 tribes to you. But he, Solomon, shall have one tribe for my servant David's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because they've forsaken me and have worshipped Ashtoreth, Chemosh, Milcom, and have not walked in my ways to do that which is right in mine eyes, to keep my statutes and my judgments, as did David his father. But I'm not going to take the whole kingdom. Of course, that's the message from God. But I will take the kingdom, verse 35, out of his son's hand, and will give it unto thee, Jeroboam, even 10 tribes. To his son I'll give the one tribe. I'm going to take you, verse 37, you'll reign according to all that your soul desires, and you'll be king over Israel. And it shall be, and there's that word, what is it? If thou wilt hearken unto all that I command thee, and wilt walk in my ways, and do that which is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, that I will be with thee. Build thee a sure house as I built for David, and will give Israel unto thee. And I will for this afflict the seed of David, but not forever. And Solomon finds out about this. And so what does Solomon want to do? Big surprise, he finds out somebody's going to take the throne. He wants to kill him. And so Jeroboam flees into Egypt, and he was there until the death of Solomon. So then you have, of course, the rest of Solomon's acts. They're written in the book of the Acts of Solomon. The time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem was, of course, 40 years. We've mentioned that before. The first 3 kings of Israel, the only 3 kings over the United Kingdom, of course, because it's going to split after Solomon. Saul, David, Solomon, each reigned 40 years. Solomon slept with his fathers, buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his stead. And that's what's going to happen in verse 12. You're going to see the people, they're going to come to Rehoboam. Remember Solomon, he had all these projects going, and he's got a levy of men, and he's got taxes and all this stuff. And so they're going to come to Rehoboam, and they're going to say, look, take it easy. We've had enough of the high taxes. We've had enough of which, again, Samuel warned them. But they said, no, we want a king. But they come to Rehoboam, and they say, give us a break here. You lighten our burden, and we're going to be your servants. And we're going to work hard for you, and we're going to work hard for the good of Israel. But just ease off a little bit. And so he says, well, give me 3 days and come back, and I'll answer. By the way, sometimes the skeptics will say there's a contradiction in the Bible because Jesus is going to be in the tomb for 3 days, and they say, well, Friday evening to Saturday evening, and then all of a sudden early Sunday morning he's risen from the dead. Well, that's only 2 days. To the Jews, even a part of the day was, in fact, sometimes we'll even do this now. They'll say you've won a 3-day vacation, which sometimes means you get to check in around, 4 or 5 o'clock on Friday, and then you've got to be out sometimes, first thing Sunday morning, 10, 11 o'clock. So we even use that terminology today, but this happens here with Rehoboam in chapter 12. We'll probably cover chapter 12 a little bit more in depth, but I'm giving you sort of a brief summary. He says, give me 3 days. They come back on the 3rd day. He doesn't say, whoa, time out. I said 3 days. It has not been 72 hours. So don't even come to me. I understood. That's accommodative. And so when Jesus said he'd be in the tomb for 3 days, well, you had part of Friday, you had all of Saturday, of course, and part of Sunday. So even a part of a day, there's no contradiction there. And by the way, the people who wanted to deny Jesus' resurrection the most were some of those early Jewish persecutors. And an argument they never used was, well, he said 3 days, but he didn't. They understood that. So Rehoboam tells them, give me 3 days, come back. So they did. During the 3 days, he goes to the older men, counselors, we would say, and they say, well, if that's what they say, why not do it? And then you'll have faithful servants for all your reign. Kind of makes sense, Rehoboam. Give them a break. Then he goes to the younger men. And of course, sometimes in our youth, we're a little more brash and brazen, and they say, I'd tell them you ain't seen nothing yet. And so Rehoboam foolishly listens to the younger men's advice. The people come back on the 3rd day, and he says, my little finger, bigger than my father's thigh. You just wait. You don't have a clue what difficult is, but I'm about to show you. And buddy, when they heard that, Jeroboam now has come back out of Egypt, out of exile because Solomon is dead. And Jeroboam says, what have we to do with Israel anymore? Everybody to your tents, and we're starting our own kingdom. And so the kingdom divided just like God said it would. There was a lot came into play here. Solomon's idolatry, Rehoboam's arbitrary decision to just keep things really hard on the people. But God has a hand in this too. In fact, Rehoboam, he sends a tax collector after they break off. He sends somebody to collect the taxes, and what do? They killed him. And so Rehoboam says, everybody get ready, we're going to war. and we're going to fix this. We're going to restore the Union. About to be a big civil war. Well, a messenger comes to Rehoboam from God and says, no, you stand down, because this is God's doing because of the sins of your father. And to his credit, at least at that point, Rehoboam, he backed down. He said, okay. And that was it. And the kingdom divided. The northern kingdom will last till about 721 BC, be destroyed by Assyria. The southern kingdom will last till about 587 BC and be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. 19 kings over the northern kingdom, 19 kings over the southern kingdom, with, of course, one usurper, if you want to count as 20, the Queen Athaliah. She never really was queen, but she kind of put herself in that position. Lord willing, we will pick up with the division of the kingdom, and that starts like a whole new section of Old Testament history. We'll pick that up in our next class together. Thank you very much. I'm thoroughly enjoying this study, and I hope you are as well. I appreciate all the time and the attention, and also very good comments. Thank you very much. We'll have a break before worship.